because it really is the most effective piece of equipment, coupled with the systems you teach or the process you teach. It's the best thing that I've ever used.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow.
All right. This is a very special episode of the Undercurrent podcast. I'm joined by my very dear friend and business coach, Alex Charfen. Alex, thanks for being here.
Oh, Garrett, I've been really excited about this. Thanks for having me.
Heck yeah. So just for a little bit of background, Alex and I have been friends for about 5 years now, and he actually started advising us pretty shortly thereafter. So I've learned a lot from him personally and professionally, and I'm really excited to have him on to share some of his wisdom and just to help everyone understand, why they should even, care about what you have to say. Alex, can you just share a little bit about your background in business and some of how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. So, I've always been an entrepreneur, and since I was young, the businesses that I've run have been either consulting or coaching or working with other businesses in some way. And so I started in my 20s as a consultant, where I worked with another organization and worked with Fortune 500 companies, Global 100 companies, and also startup consumer and computer electronics businesses, always coaching, always, back then it was called consulting. And so I was an outside consultant, a manufacturer's rep. I also did packaging consulting, distribution consulting. Basically, Garrett, when a company had a failing product or product line or division or territory, we were called to come in and make things better and move them in the right direction. And that business, what we did was we applied process, structure, and routine to do turnarounds. And we would come in and figure out what was missing and turn those things around. And after I was in that business, when I met my wife, I left the consulting business. It's a much longer story than that, and there's a lot of good and bad there. I'm going to share the highlights today so that we can get into talking about the Neubie, but we were in real estate for a period of time. This is kind of foreshadowing. We were in real estate in South Florida. We did extraordinarily well. We had 3 different businesses, literally tens of millions of dollars in annual productivity and revenue. And in 2007, that all went into the vacuum called the foreclosure crisis. And we actually went bankrupt and ended up starting another business out of bankruptcy, where we created a information product that we trained real estate agents on how to help people through the foreclosure scenarios. And so we ended up going bankrupt in 2007. We were in Florida, where it got hit very early. By 2011, we were the 21st fastest growing company in the country. And now, again, there's a lot of good and bad in that story. I always hesitate to be the coach or consultant that just shares the highlights. Like, there was some serious challenges. It's not like we went through bankruptcy and just it all turned around, but we were able to get through bankruptcy, launch the product, become liquid millionaires within a year. And we were the 21st fastest growing company in our first year of eligibility. And I often get asked, how did you do that? And it was applying the same process, structure, and routine that I did when I was consulting at the higher company levels. And the real estate product we had was called the Certified Distressed Property Expert designation. We trained almost 50,000 real estate agents. And we would probably be doing it today, but it was a product for the foreclosure crisis. So when the foreclosure crisis went away, we shifted, and we were already kind of an online business. We were already doing a lot of information products, and we were doing some coaching, and we shifted going away from real estate exclusively and started coaching really what we call expert-based businesses. When you look at the membership we have today, we coach over 200 companies worldwide. I think somewhere around 240, 250 today. And most of them, I'd say the majority of them, are run by some type of an expert. So we have experts who run e-commerce businesses or product businesses, kind of others that run practices or service businesses. So Garrett, you're kind of a hybrid of all of those. And then we also have, we have coaches and we have agencies. And so service-based businesses that are online, that are selling products run by an expert. And today we help those businesses grow and scale through hardcore process, structure, and routine. I think every entrepreneur gets into business to have freedom. And if they're anything like me, which most are, entrepreneurs are very similar in our personality types. We tend to fight process, structure, and routine. But then, I've been in business long enough to know in the times where I fight routine, where I fight process, where that voice in my head says, I don't want the same meeting on my calendar every week. Those are the times where my businesses do not grow. And I feel a complete and total lack of freedom. And what I found is by having hardcore process, structure, and routine that I do not disturb, I allow it to continue. Even if I'm not going to be there, I don't cancel meetings. I let my team continue to run our structure. Working within a structure, that's when I usually get the freedom that I want and the results that I want.
That's awesome. It's a little bit of that almost ironic or seemingly opposite notion of like discipline equals freedom, where when you have structure, when you have discipline, that actually, reduces your decision fatigue. It sets up the framework to where you have freedom within those boundaries that you've created, kind of the ultimate freedom. So for people who are just listening to the audio and don't see it, behind Alex, there's a few of those Inc. 500 awards. So it's legit. I've been over there and I've seen him in person. It's pretty cool.
Anybody who wants to look me up, go to the Inc. 500 site. And Garrett, we weren't just on the Inc. 500 list. I think it's important to share. I've worked with a lot of fast growth companies, and in fast growth companies, there's a constant that there's collateral damage. There's a lot of challenges in fast growth companies. You hire the wrong people, you bring them on the wrong way. We did a lot of that. We had those challenges, but at the same time that we won the Inc. 500 awards, we were also voted the best place to work in Austin by size. We made that list each of those years. So even though there was challenges in our business, and believe me, it was not perfect, we still were able to get voted by our team as the best place to work and one of the best places to work in Austin. So when you have process, structure, and routine, process relieves entrepreneurial anxiety, which is real. As entrepreneurs, we just feel anxiety. It also creates freedom, but process, structure, and routine also protects your team. And that is really important to us.
Mm-hmm. And, in my experience in interacting with you these last several years, I was first interested, because, we would talk, you were, a client of ours, and we'll talk about some of that experience later on, but, we would talk and I'd ask you about, since you had been a manufacturer's rep and you had helped scale distribution for many types of electronics products. So I'd ask you a lot about the product side of the business just here and there. And you had, tremendous wisdom to share. And then from the CDPE, when you trained all these real estate experts, I was talking with you about how we were intending to roll out a certification to train doctors and therapists, and you had such great insights there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is Alex is just a wonderful resource, and he shares so graciously. And then, as great as that was, I think that this same idea of process, structure, and routine and the systems that we've implemented in our business, both in the brick and mortar business, our showroom in Austin, and then the Neubie business here, where we're training other doctors and therapists and other providers around the world how to use this. That structure and process has been so beneficial for us. So I'm excited to talk more about that. Let me just see if there's any, whether it's that or just kind of pose the question to you for the various practitioners who are listening to this, whether they have a Neubie, they're considering getting one. What's the top piece of advice or the biggest opportunity that you see in these more service-based businesses, whether it's rehab therapy, more fitness oriented? What's kind of the biggest opportunity you see generally across that category of businesses?
So, if we were talking about a specific business, I would ask exactly what the level they were at, and we could address what that business needed. But if we're just if we're saying all practitioners or all like therapists or practitioners, service-based businesses in that space, we coach a lot of them, Garrett. We have a lot of chiros and functional medicine doctors and therapists and physical therapists. And here's what we see across the board in those types of businesses is that there's a lack of a core process. And here's what I mean by that. I know I say process all the time. It's like, when you're writing, you don't want to have the same word over and over again. Whenever I look at a transcript of one of my podcasts, I'm like, oh my gosh, all I said was process. But that's just how it is. When we work with a practitioner, what we want them to do is move away from selling themselves and start selling a process. Like, let me give you an example. A really good example is one of the practitioners we work with, Jason Bradley. So Jason's a functional medicine doctor, and everybody who knew Jason in the past wants Jason. They want Jason to talk to him. They want Jason on the phone. They want to interact with him and interact with him exclusively. And I think it's like that for a lot of doctors, therapists, and practitioners, because you haven't given your clientele or your members or your patients a different option. And the way that you give them a different option is you brand the outcome you create. So Jason has an outcome called the Epic Diet Plan. And he has this entire process that is really well spelled out, that has a step-by-step application. And he sells that, and he sells a result. So if you go through the Epic Diet process, which I have, you will reduce inflammation, you will get rid of food sensitivities, you will optimize, you'll feel better than you ever have, and you'll sleep better than you ever have and have more energy. And, I actually went through that process. I bought it from Jason, interacted with him because we're friends, but I actually did all of my interaction within the process with his team, and I got an incredible result. And so if you give your members, your patients, your clients an alternative where they get the outcome they want, you can actually scale the business. And, we have this joke phrase in our membership. Whenever somebody in our membership says, oh, at an event, this will often happen. I know you've seen this happen, Garrett. Well, someone will say, well, Alex, I'm the only person who can. Well, as soon as that leaves somebody's mouth, everybody in the room starts snickering and laughing because they know what's coming next. Like, as soon as you say, I'm the only person who can, I'm going to prove you wrong. Because can you imagine, and I hear things like this, like, I'm the only person who can do intakes. I'm the only person who can set up a therapy plan. I'm the only person who can figure out what the patient really needs. Can you imagine if Elon Musk was like, I'm the only person who can set up the factory floor. I'm the only person who can do the design for the Tesla. I'm the only person who can be there when the rocket launches. Like, come on. The way that you scale, the way that you grow, the way that you actually create something greater than yourself is to remove yourself from that unicorn position. So in our memberships, we have this joke that as soon as somebody says that, we say, you are not a unicorn. And we're serious about it. It's like, do not make yourself a unicorn in your mind, because you will never be able to replace yourself. And that is the key to really growing and scaling a business. And when somebody says it twice, we'll say, you are not a freaking unicorn. And occasionally we'll use a different word, but it's become such a joke that we had stickers printed. So at our events, you often see on computers stuff that says, I am not a unicorn, because our members take it on as a badge of honor. Like, I'm not a unicorn. I'm never going to put myself in that position where I'm the only one who can do it.
That's awesome. That's great advice. And I think that speaks to what you were talking about, people wanting freedom. They start a business because they want freedom. But then I hear from a lot of doctors and therapists that they almost, as much as they love patient care and they got into it because they wanted to serve people in their community at a very high level, they often get to the point of burnout where they almost begin to resent their patients because they feel trapped by having to be there and have their hands on every person. And if they could have another therapist, working within their business, if they didn't have to see all the patients, if they could spend some time working on the business instead of in the business, that would give them an opportunity to scale where it's not so dependent on them. They could take a vacation. They could take their kids to school. They could get a little more time to do the things that they want.
Garrett, for us, it's a little more dramatic. Like when we see, I have a progression that I think that practitioners go through. So whether it's a therapist, a doctor, a chiro, whoever it is that we're talking to,
yes,
they go to school because they want to help people. And, in my experience, 100% of the practitioners I've ever been around want to help people. I know that there's this impression sometimes out there that some practitioners go into it just for the money. I've never worked with or met one of those. However, here's what happens. You go to school because you want to help people, and then you end up in this business where school had nothing to do with what you're now doing. And 90% of what you do, you don't really have training to run the business, do the marketing, grow the stuff. And you end up getting stuck somewhere in the business. It kind of plateaus, it stops growing. You're doing the same thing every day. Maybe patients aren't getting the result you want, but here's what happens. Practitioners feel so much pressure that we kind of see it as a cascade. First, it starts with frustration towards the business. Then there's some irritation, frustration with the team, or with, if you don't have people around you, there's irritation, frustration with the patients that are coming in. And then what happens, it's not almost developing negative feelings, there's a level of where you get to patient animosity, where it's like, I have to go see these people. I have to help these people. And we see like most practitioners who don't get help, but want to make a bigger impact, start feeling that lack of bigger impact with not being able to get the help they need. And it does get focused on the irritation of the moment, which is normally a patient walking in. And so when a practitioner's reached that state of patient or team animosity, the only thing we know of that will get them out of there, short of leaving the profession, is hardcore process, structure, and routine. Branding the process, then applying it like crazy in the business, and making sure there's a team there to back them up so they don't feel like they're doing everything themselves.
If you're ready to supercharge your practice, listen to this. Garrett and Team NeuFit have just released a new online course entitled Introduction to the NeuFit Method. In this detailed 8-hour course, you'll gain mastery of the fundamental techniques in our practice, including muscle testing and activations, nerve glides, and joint articulations. You'll also get introduced to our patented direct current stimulation device, the Neubie, an incredible machine that's empowered professionals just like you to help their patients heal, adapt, and grow faster than they ever thought possible. To learn more, go to www.neu.fit/learn. And now back to the show.
That's beautifully said. And I think that this is an area where we've heard, actually it reminds me of a podcast from between 5 and 10 episodes ago, where it's funny enough, Jason Waz, physical therapist, talked about how having the Neubie allowed him to do this very thing, because he was the guy where, he was the experienced one. All of the patients would come in and they'd request him. And then when he got the Neubie, he was able to train his much more junior PTs or PTAs to use that. And they were getting such good outcomes that patients would come in and they would request that junior person. And of course, Jason's not only, he's not upset that someone doesn't want to see him. He's overjoyed because that frees him up. And he actually had the time, the space in his life to be able to create a whole new continuing education platform. So he's now educating other PTs, providing continuing education to them on various elements of clinical and business practice. And so I think that's beautifully said. And I think there's an opportunity here, especially for the practitioners who are listening to this who already have Neubies, where we can talk about different ways to brand this process. And I think there's ways to even improve that. So that's fabulous advice.
Yeah, for sure. It's really by the way, that story you just shared, when we've helped a lot of practitioners get out of what we call the firing line. It's like, we need to get you out of being the only person who can do the thing. And whenever a practitioner gets the request for somebody else, to us, that's like the biggest win you can possibly get. It's like, they only wanted you before, and now they're requesting someone other than you. They're requesting the person you hired, the person you trained. You have to look at that as like, you have now succeeded at successfully replacing yourself, and you can scale that.
That's right. Yeah. If Elon Musk is still out there assembling the doors on the car,
you got some problems.
they're making one a year instead of, 500,000 or whatever, So another thing, as we've been working together, I definitely want to, because you've had some interesting stories with the Neubie. I want to get into that. Is there anything else in terms of just high level stuff before we move on, that we should share with specifically doctors, therapists, clinic owners, practitioners?
Yeah, I think, just to go a little bit deeper into that, I'm not a unicorn thing. I think here's what happens to practitioners and where they get stuck, Garrett. And you can actually see it in the numbers in businesses in the United States. When you look at the number of businesses that are 100 to 300,000, there's like 1.7 million. When you look at 300 to a million, there's 1.9 million. So when you look at all the businesses in the United States, from the smallest to the largest, there's this declining curve, but there's actually a little bump where there's more 300 to a million businesses than there is 100 to 300,000 businesses. And the reason is practitioners get stuck, and they get stuck in a place where they're doing it all themselves. They don't know how to back out of it, so they're not the only person doing it. And the advice that I have for practitioners is, don't try and do it all at once. Here's what happens. The thought in your head, or the thought that we've helped people process, and the mindset we've helped people shift, is that they think, oh, I need to replace someone. Someone needs to come in and do everything I do. There's no way that's possible. I'm the only one who can do all of this. I'm overwhelmed. And we have a podcast. I have a podcast called the Momentum Podcast. And if you go to my website, you can search for an episode called Double Your Productivity in 2 Weeks. And it's about doing a time study and figuring out what you're doing that you need to do and what you're doing that you can offload. And the way we help practitioners offload is one time study at a time. You record everything you're doing for a couple of weeks, then look at it. And if it can be turned into a job description, you go find the person, maybe even part-time, who comes in and starts relieving pressure from you. And you do that one step at a time. And one of the things, like the myth in the practitioner, doctor industry, medical industry, whether it's physical therapy, everything, is that you cannot replace yourself. And we actually believe that is a myth, because what we've shown over and over again is that step by step, when you use process, not only can you replace yourself, but here's what's really exciting is that often you start getting higher retention, higher resell, higher upsell numbers, because when you're no longer trying to be the business owner and the entrepreneur and the CEO and the marketer and everything else, and you're not doing that and practicing, when there's someone who's just exclusively focused on the outcome for the person walking into your business, it radically changes how the business grows.
That's so true. If you're trying to wear all of those hats, you can't be as effective in any of them. And so I've seen that as I was at various stages of this transition, where I was still doing sessions with people and working on elements of growing the business. I'd be in there, and I wouldn't think as quickly of the next thing that I might normally try in a treatment progression, or I just wasn't as effective because I wasn't doing it all the time. I was almost a little bit out of practice, and that was a challenging part. And maybe I'll mention this in case some people relate to it, but for me, I identified so much as the guy who would help people get better that to step out of that and have hand that off to someone else, it was like a shift in a deeply seated identity of myself. Yeah. And so having to change that, I think it's only possible, one, if we're first aware of it, and two, if we have a different identity that we see of as being more beneficial or more important to which we can aspire, that allows us to do that. And so I think that's the only thing that can really motivate us to change. If there's some sort of pain around wanting to shed that, or some sort of very strong desire or aspiration to move in another direction. And this, I can tell you that what Alex is sharing here is this is the thought process, and that time study has been super beneficial for us. That's how we've hired, 10 new team members or something, is going through that process and using that to identify, okay, what am I doing that can be handed off to the next person, and having everyone on our team ask that same question. So that's awesome.
It's interesting, Garrett, when we were going through those conversations, I remember you brought up what so many practitioners bring up when we're having this talk. It's like, I'm always going to do this. And there's this defensiveness. I remember you saying, Alex, I'm always going to have clinic hours. I'm always going to be, and I'm like, okay, Garrett, you know what? Just allow the possibility that fades, allow the possibility that there's a different outcome for you here. And, for anybody who's listening, here's what's interesting. As you start to offload this, then you're going to now feel this loss of identity and like, whoa, I need to keep doing this. I need to keep my hands on people. I need to still be doing, and here's the visual that I like to paint. What's more important, you actually treating a patient, or you standing in front of a team of 10 people that are going to treat 10 different patients in the next couple of hours and treat 300 patients this week, that there's no way you possibly could have done it and given a whole community an outcome rather than just the people that you can serve. And it was fun to watch you go through that entire progression, Garrett. There was a lot, and there's a lot of insecurity in it. I think anybody who's listening, if you feel insecure or challenged or anxious around those things, those are very valid concerns. That's why having a clear process that you train consistently and that is going to get people the outcome is the way to do this and the way to hand it off.
Yes, absolutely. And Alex has a lot of wonderful content on teaching that very thing. And so at the end here, we'll end in the notes for the show, we'll put links on how to access Alex's podcast, see some of his content, maybe become a peer of mine and join the coaching group, whatever works for you. But let's shift for a moment, because you have some really interesting experiences also with the Neubie, and there's a couple different examples of how you've used it that I don't think we've touched on in any episodes, at least up to this point. So can you share some of the kind of biggest highlights that you've had with the Neubie over the last few years?
Yeah, and for me, they're highlights not just of the Neubie, but of the methods that you coach and train. So if I can step back a little and give a little bit of the story of how you and I met, I've always been a kind of a bit of a biohacker. Certainly not to like the lengths of Dave Asprey or anybody like that, but Dave has become a close friend because it's such an obsession of mine. And when I look at
and you're not that far off in terms of the equipment you have and the level of dedication and all that. I mean, let's be honest,
Yeah, we built pretty much probably $250,000 to $500,000 rehab center in our house.
Yeah.
And I'm the only patient.
That's right. Your wife and kids are allowed in.
My wife and kids too. Yeah. So yeah, my wife every once in a while, she'll let it slip out. Like, I'm so glad you buy this stuff. It totally helps. But so, for my whole life, when I was younger, I was physiologically inept. I was the kid that, like, I still have vivid memories of this in third grade, being the kid who during the presidential physical fitness test in California, I came in last place in every category, including when I was measured against the girls in my class. So I was like that kid who always felt like I when it came to physiology, when it came to doing anything physical, I was not going to win. And probably at around 13 to 15, that turned into, okay, how do I fix this? How do I change this? How do I make this better? So my whole life, I've been seeing a chiropractor since I was 16, and my parents didn't take me. I drove myself there. And, I've always sought alternative therapies, alternative medicines, acupuncture, cupping, massage. Like, the list of modalities I've tried is it's exhaustive, and it would be difficult for me to even go through them on this podcast. And there was a day where I was actually getting both a chiropractic adjustment and a Rolfing session in the same building. And I walked out of the Rolfing session, and the entire time that this woman, Norma Bandy, was working on me, I heard like yelling and plates clanking and like grunting. And I'm like, what is going on? There's like, there's a massage therapist and some essential oil lady and another massage person and a Rolfer and an acupuncturist. Who's yelling and screaming? Like, what is this? And I went in and I met Garrett, and there was this guy doing squats with like all these wires hanging off of him. And I think I'm a little unique in that I was like, oh, well, then this is definitely for me. What are they doing here? Like wires and cables. And, I remember you explaining what you were doing with electricity. And I was so immediately intrigued. And so, I started coming in and getting sessions with you, and within just a few sessions, using the methods that you have put together, I was feeling levels of flexibility I'd never felt before. There was some issues that I had in my shoulders and my lower back that over the course of just a few sessions disappeared. And I know that sounds so grandiose and kind of like impossible, but literally I had rotator cuff stuff. I had shoulder things that really went away through using the NeuFit method of identifying where the issue was and then really going after it. And then, as an adult, I've become far more active than I've ever been. 13, 15 is where the light went on, and I work out a ton, I optimize. And if you're someone who does a lot of things, you get injured. And so my first real intense experience with the Neubie outside of just using it for rehab and optimization was when I tore my bicep muscle off of the forearm on my left arm. It's one of those excruciating
tell everyone what you were doing. It was on those.
I was doing an upside down pull up. So I was hanging on a pull up bar upside down, and I was doing upside down pull ups, and like just rotated in the wrong way and stretched the bicep too long, and I heard it snap, and it snapped and went up into my shoulder. And so I got off of the pull-up bar I was on. I knew that I was in a really bad place because I literally did not have a bicep in the right place. I had to push the muscle out of the shoulder complex. It was horrible. And within a couple of days, I was on an operating table having it reattached in Arizona. I actually flew out to work with somebody who does that surgery for professional baseball pitchers, because if they experience something like this, like they go to the expert. So I went to the expert. And when I came back, I think it was my third day after surgery, I immediately started using the Neubie. And all we did was I slept with one. I actually kept it at my house, and I connected a pad on my shoulder, and I connected a pad on my fingertips, and I would just sleep with a low dose of current going through my arm every day. And in addition to that, I wrapped it with a game ready machine. So not only was it getting a low dose of current most of the day, it was also frozen and getting alternative pressure and then release from the game ready. And what happened was, I remember the doctor that I had the surgery with told me that due to my age, I think I was about 40, I was over 40 at the time. He said that the chances of me getting back to 100% range of motion were 0. He said, if we get to 90%, we're going to be really excited about that. And that the recovery, but based on my age and based on how the tear was and how the tendon was, that it would probably take somewhere like 8 months to 8 to 18 months. That was the range that he gave of where I would actually be able to use the bicep again and lift weights and do everything that I had done before. So I wore a brace for the first, it was 30 days. So 30 days in the brace, but 30 days in the brace with the game ready and the Neubie. And when I took the brace off, I went straight back to 100% range of motion. And I sent the doctor a video because he asked me to take a video when I took the brace off, and I sent it to him. And that afternoon he replied and said, "Can you take another video? I need a different angle." Like he was so shocked at two things. One, the range of motion. And the other thing was the lack of atrophy in the bicep. I definitely had atrophy. Like there's no way my arm was the same size, but in that type of a surgery where the tendon is reattached, the atrophy is normally like over 50%. It's a very, very devastating type of injury to the bicep. Mine atrophied, but nowhere near that much. In fact, coming out of the brace, my arms kind of looked normal if I just stood still and you looked at me. If you really looked, you could see that there was a difference. And so the doctor said it was the first time he'd ever had anybody who had come out of the brace to 100% range of motion at any age. And so that happened. And then I continued to use the Neubie, and we were somewhat aggressive. Like according to, what everybody was telling me about how I had to baby the arm, we immediately started treating the bicep, running currents from the forearm to the bicep, from the back of the shoulder to the bicep, and like every single day treating it. And I think it was probably 4 months later, I was doing pull-ups. And, the doctor actually suggested I should be really careful with him. So I remember the first day doing it, I'm like, can I do this? Is this possible? And I was really trying to put all the weight on my right arm, but there was no issue. There was like a little bit of tenderness and soreness. And since then, I've, whenever I feel any type of an issue with the bicep, because having that type of reattachment surgery, occasionally you get some tightness, occasionally you get some fatigue, I'll run and throw the Neubie on it, and I don't even feel like I've had a surgery.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know there's a few more, but maybe we'll save those for a part 2. We'll get you on it for part 2.
Well, there's just one thing I want to share is, I have 2 daughters, and when I was a kid, I went through growth spurts. I had what was called Osgood slaughter, and I knew that was probably going to happen to my kids, and they've done that. They like grow and then they pause, and then they grow and then they pause, and they've experienced really severe growing pains. And the Neubie has been the most effective tool we use. We've iced and we've done stuff like that, but as soon as I had a Neubie in my house, whenever one of the kids would say, "My ankle hurts, my knee hurts, my arm hurts," we'd take them in, and literally one treatment for growing pains and it's gone. And they're not complaining about the issue anymore. So having, I don't know that everyone's going to be able to have a Neubie in their house, but having access to a Neubie for things like that, like the immediate reduction of pain, the immediate reduction of frustration and of the feeling of having that stuff, I always tell people always ask me, out of all the stuff you have, I have 3 PMF machines. I've got a infrared sauna. I have infrared lights. I have the red light therapy. I could continue listing on and on and on. Whenever somebody says, like, if you could only take one thing, what would it be? And I get that question often. It's always the Neubie, because there is so many different applications. It's a complete gym just in a box.
That's awesome. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for sharing those. The bicep is so interesting because, people hear these stories and they think, oh my gosh, it's a miracle or something. And really those types of stories should be common, because it's your body is actually, that's the actual rate at which it can heal. We just, impede our own healing process because of how we just neurologically, subconsciously guard and protect and brace and inhibit around the injury. And by just, resetting some of those protective patterns, you get out of the way those impediments that would be blocking the healing process. And so that's awesome. I love that story. I so appreciate you sharing that on here. And then the parts with the kids, the same thing with us. Like we see, our older daughter, I think twice now as a kind of a competitive dancer, she's tweaked, a knee and an ankle or a hip. I don't know, I forget now, but just one or two treatments, and the kids, they respond, tend to respond even more quickly. So it's so cool to see that. But that's a really cool, I don't think we've talked about or haven't even really discussed that much, even internally, like with our team. That's a really cool use case. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. Garrett.
If anyone's interested in the type of, coaching business related content that you have to share, actually, let me share my perspective. So if people, ask me about this, I say, well, my education is in engineering and neuroscience, and I never went to business school. So I feel like being in your coaching program has really been my version of getting an MBA. So, I'm grateful to you for that. And if anyone else is interested in, just kind of learning more about your content, what you have to offer, seeing your podcast, can you let everyone know, please, the best way to find you?
Absolutely, Garrett. So the podcast that we have is called Momentum for the Entrepreneurial Personality Type. Momentum's kind of my word. I feel like as entrepreneurs, we live for momentum. And so that podcast—
I thought it was process.
What was that?
I thought your word was process.
Process creates momentum.
Oh, there we go.
Actually, you know what? The quote I use is actually process protects your momentum. Because once you're in momentum, what keeps you there is process. And so on that podcast, most of the episodes are somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. They're usually single episode or single issue episodes where it's like, let's solve a problem. Let's understand how to get past something, like double your productivity in 2 weeks. And if you go to momentumpodcast.com, you can listen to it on any one of the platforms that's out there. It's also on iTunes. And then if you'd like to understand a little bit more about what we do, we have a download that you should get called the Billionaire Code. And the Billionaire Code is our framework. It's the 9 levels that it takes any business, any practice, e-commerce company, any of the types of companies that I talked about earlier to go from 0 to $100 million. And it will, if you download that framework, it will show you where you are now, what you should be focused on in order to get to the next step, and maybe some of the things you've missed that have you plateaued or not really in the business that you want. And if you go to billionairecode.com, you answer a few questions for my team, you can download that matrix. There's a video of me explaining it, and there's also a book called The Billionaire Code Decoded that will help you walk through the analysis process of where are you in your business, exactly what you should be focused on so that you make the most progress that you can to the next level.
And it's so interesting. It's able to turn business into almost like the rehabilitation process. You reach one milestone, and then something predictable happens, and then you have to do something to solve a problem or identify and take advantage of a new opportunity, and then you go on to the next milestone. And it's a really, really cool, very logical, very well thought out approach to business growth. So I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Alex. It's been a pleasure. We'll have to have you on again for another one as well.
Oh, I'd love to come. I mean, I want to come back and just share Neubie stories, because I think I have some of the funniest Neubie stories in history. And the day that I brought 2 crazy bodybuilders into NeuFit that were like, oh, we got this, and then couldn't walk by the afternoon because they challenged Garrett to give them a workout, or there's so many other stories. I want to come back and just share Neubie stories, and then some of the other successes that we've had with the machine, because it really is the most effective piece of equipment, coupled with the systems you teach or the process you teach. It's the best thing that I've ever used.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Undercurrent Podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date as we release future episodes.